Hello out there, and today we're going to be talking about the Massdrop Perpetua, and this is a design from TJ Schwarz, the same guy who designed the CRKT Caligo and the Browse Blades icon that you've seen on my channel quite a bit. Caligo I actually carried today. Really cool little knife. But the Perpetua is one that was distributed by Massdrop and produced by Millit Knives here in the United States. And it's been one that was just really appealing to a number of different people for a lot of different reasons. You know, for me, when I first saw this knife announced in February, I jumped all over it on Massdrop and actually ordered 3 of them, the 3 that you see here, because, well, one, I knew I wanted one for myself, and I also knew of a couple friends who would definitely want one, and so that's where the other 2 are going. But my main draw to the knife was the axis lock, because Benchmade's patent on the axis lock has sort of expired, and so now everyone out there who makes knives has free reign to legally produce this locking mechanism and put it into their knife designs. And so the first real big one, I guess, unless you're counting like Ganzos and Santa Moos that have been doing it for years, the first real big one is on this Perpetua. And yeah, I was just really interested to see how they would incorporate it and what the quality of it would be and if I would like it. And to be honest with you guys, I do. I really like it. It's executed nicely. There is one aspect to this knife that is different from, I think, just about every Benchmade axis lock that I've come across, and we're going to talk about that. I do have one disassembled up top that I can show you that on. But the other stuff we're going to talk about today is really more about who this knife is for and what the other reasons for really wanting this knife were. So let's just continue with that. You know, I said that I was really all about the axis lock, but for a lot of people, probably more so than the axis lock, a lot of people were really interested in this right here, the Nitro V steel. It is a new sort of trendy steel, I guess. It is just not available on a lot of knives yet. You know, it just isn't out there quite that much, and certainly not at the $115, $120 price point that this knife was found at on Massdrop. Secondary market, this will probably be inflated. Hopefully, eventually, this will be back on Massdrop in another run. Usually that happens when you know, the knife is successful. So I think in time they will probably do another run of these, possibly different colors, possibly different blade shapes. I mean, there is a lot of potential money in this design, so I'd be surprised if this 1,000 piece run that it was the end of it. Honestly, I just don't think that's going to happen. But getting back to the Nitro V, that was the appeal for, like I said, a lot of people. You know, not being able to get this this steel, not having accessibility to it at this price point. For me, no, that's really not the draw at all. You know, it just has zero actual draw for me. You know, if this were S30V or S35VN or M390 or a number of other steels, I would have wanted it just as much. But I completely understand the people who wanted to pick this knife up for that reason, to really get their hands on it and test it and use that steel. And that's exactly what this knife is. It's a knife that should be used. You know, you take a look at this design, the lines of it, it's very simple, no real bells and whistles, but I think that there is a lot of beauty in that simplicity, and yeah, I was just really drawn to it, really drawn to the look of the knife. And if you look at it, let's try to move some stuff out of the way and bring in something that I think is pretty similar, the Mini Griptilian, the 555. Obviously, we have a difference in the opening mechanism with the thumb hole versus, you know, the thumb stud, but the hollow grind and the general like blade shape, especially up at the tip, they're not all that dissimilar. You know, the size is different, the thickness is different, the weight is definitely different. This feels like more of a beater, but design-wise, they're not all that dissimilar. So I did have a little bit of familiarity when I first picked this up. But that said, this knife does not at all feel like a Benchmade. Let me tell you that. It just doesn't feel like a Benchmade. And that's not a bad thing. A lot of people are going to hear this and think that I'm knocking the knife, and I'm not. It just doesn't feel the way that Benchmade knives feel. You know, when Benchmade does G10 and when Benchmade, you know, does, I don't know, I don't even know exactly what I'm trying to say here, but it doesn't seem like this is the kind of way that Benchmade would have executed this design, not with these materials and not with this kind of weight. You know, usually they go for something that is a little more thin and streamlined and light. And while they do have some like peel ply texture G10, most of their stuff is more polished. You know, you think about knives like the North Fork and this and the 484. You know, that's usually what you see when it comes to Benchmade and their G10. There are exceptions to the rule. The Butch Ball Flipper is one of them, but the point is, when I am holding this knife, I do not think that it reminds me of a Benchmade at all. It reminds me more, and now people are going to really think I'm hating on the knife, but it reminds me more of a Ganzo. It reminds me a whole lot more of a Ganzo in that it just feels hefty and it feels excellent and ready to use, and like you should be ready to just beat the crap out of something with this knife. You know, and that's how I felt every time I picked up a Ganzo. I felt like no fear that I was going to wreck the thing because they're built like tanks and they have good G10 and they're grippy. And yeah, it's just something that you would attack a project with. And I'm not going to lie. I mean, there are plenty of times where I've had a Benchmade in my pocket and I've put it down and pulled out a knife that I wanted to beat up and was more comfortable beating up than that Benchmade. And this is that knife. This is the knife that you would want to beat up. It's $120, sure, but it is designed to be that beater. So yeah, just an interesting feeling when you get this in the hands. And getting back to the comparison with Ganzo, let me be perfectly clear. The G10 on this knife is certainly a step up from the G10 that I've seen in Ganzo. A little bit higher traction, really nicely contoured. Not that Ganzos are bad, but this just seems a lot better. The jimping is better. You know, there's a lot of things about this that are significantly better than Ganzos, including the materials, but just the overall feel sort of harkens back to that more so than a Benchmade. Hopefully that aspect of it makes sense. One of the things I want to address is QC. So a number of people and a number of the early reviews and comments and feedback that I've seen has said that the QC on these knives just wasn't all that good. Certain people had some issues with Omega springs. Certain people just reported just very, very stiff and tight knives. And I don't know, just all the other things that come with the new release of a knife, I guess people are experiencing. And that's really not a surprise. What I will say is that all three of these knives were very, very stiff out of box. Very stiff. Now that said, all I needed to do was a slight adjustment to the pivot screw, a very slight adjustment, and it loosened them up. Still kept very good lockup, and they were able to not necessarily free drop, but they were a whole lot smoother. I was able to get them to free drop even without breaking them in with just a slight little bit of play side to side. So with a lot of my experience with Benchmades and the way that their action worked, it really wasn't that far off from those. You know, that said, this guy right here, I mean, is stupid with perfect lockup, just stupid smooth all the time, and so Benchmade I've seen has gotten just significantly better over the past few years. But when it comes to the action and yeah, just that slight adjustment, I would much rather have a knife come out of box stiff than have a lot of play up and down or left and right. And so no real problem with that. You just have to tinker with it a little bit. So of the three that I had, this one that's disassembled, which is my personal knife for now, this one, it's the lowest number. This one was number 32, I believe. And then I also got 44, which is going to my buddy in Greece. And then number 9, what is this? 949, which is going to my friend Bill up in New York. So these three, like I said, all of them were stiff. I think that 44, more so than any of the other ones, just like got super smooth really quick. It's centered perfectly. This one out of the three, I think, is the best one. 949 got very, very smooth, but it is slightly off center, as you can see right here. I haven't disassembled it. I am not going to because it's not my knife. If Bill wants to do that, he certainly can. But there's really no rubbing, and I don't think it's that huge of an issue. but I think that it probably could be adjusted and fixed. So yeah, just bring your attention to that. There is always going to be some kind of variance, especially on the first run of something, and so that's why, more than anything, I think that that Millit is going to learn a lot from doing this, and that they will just increasingly get better, and so we'll continue to see more of these. Like I said, different color variations, blade shapes, who knows what else. All right, but what I'm most excited for is the future. And not just the future of this design, but the future of the axis lock. And one of the things that Millit did, and maybe it was a TJ Schwarz decision, and maybe it was a Millit decision, I'm not sure how that collaboration really works, but one of the things that they did that I really think is genius in the way that they designed this is they went with a bushed pivot. So here's the disassembled knife. I'm not taking it all the way apart, so you can see here are the liners, and we still have the bush pivot in there, and the stop pin. This is number 32, and so you can just see how that sort of sits. But the difference between this and a Benchmade axis lock, right? So with a Benchmade axis lock, you have your pivot screw just like this, just like so many pivot screws, if we can get it focused. All right, so like one screw screws into a back end. You know, there's only one T8 screw, and it's very simple. So looking at that on an actual knife, here's the 943, there's the back of it, very simple. Where's that mini griptilian again? I don't know how I lost it already, but it's gone. All right, here it is. So, yep, here is the back, here is the pivot, very simple, like I said. On this knife, though, it's different. So you have two pivot screws that you actually screw in. Right here. So the two pivot screws on the bush pivot, one goes on each side. And that might not seem like it's that like great big special and fancy deal. You know, it's exactly what the Para 3s do and the paramilitary 2s, and a lot of other Spydercos use a bush pivot. But what is special about this is it makes assembly and disassembly of this knife easier than any other axis knife ever. You know, I've made a video about how to disassemble a Benchmade mini griptilian. I'll actually link to that down below if you're interested in checking that out. It's become very easy after a lot of practice and, you know, figuring out the right method. But this way, with a bush pivot, you can literally just you know, take those screws out. You know, those two screws, leave the bushing in, and then just pull all the pieces apart like I did. And then you have your knife disassembled. Clean, put it back together, there you go. I mean, unless you have to get all the way into the pivot, you don't even have to remove this part, you know, if you just want to do some interior cleaning or whatever it is you want to do. But even if you pop this out, all you have to do is pop it back in and then slap the scales back on, instead of trying to figure out, you know, how to put back together a typical axis lock. So that's one of the things that really excites me for this kind of design moving forward, is that there is some innovation. It's not just a typical axis lock. And while this knife, for me, to be honest with you, is never going to find its way into my daily EDC, just because it is a little bit bigger and beefier than what I need, and because of the similarity in design to the mini griptilian here, it's just not going to supplant that. It's not going to happen, even though I do really like it and I admire the quality that we have here, and I think the price point is fair. It's just not going to knock anything out of my rotation that I'm already using. But that said, like I said, I'm very excited about what they might do next. And if it's Millit or someone else, just the fact that the ball is rolling, and potentially we will see more axis locks coming out that might push Benchmade to be more creative with it as well. Just more going on that I just think makes the already bright future of knife addicts and knife collectors even brighter. So that's really my take, guys. Not really a review, just sort of a look at some aspects of this knife. Hopefully you've seen some other really good videos out there, because there are some when it comes to this model. But any questions, comments, complaints, suggestions, as always, let me know down below. Hopefully you enjoyed this video, and I'll talk with you again soon. Take care. Have a good one.